Hey folks, today I'm going to cover chapter 3, and also a week from today you will have your first exam, and it will cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. It will involve short answers. You'll have a time frame in which you need to turn that into me. All of that will be explained on the exam. So you will receive that exam on Monday morning, and I will give you 24 hours to respond and send in your responses. And again, that will cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. I will also give you a review. I will send on Blackboard on Wednesday a review, which will give you hints as to what this first exam will be. And it sort of gives you, as we go on into the semester, ideas of how I cover things and what I cover. So today we're going to actually address the Texas Constitution, which our Constitutional Convention was in 1875. We have in the Constitution, it limits our legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Our legislative branch, of course, is the House and the Senate. Our executive, of course, is Governor Abbott, and our judicial are all of the court systems. We're also in this chapter going to cover the process of amending and revising the Constitution. We're going to describe why amendments are frequently necessary as times change, of course. I mean, we're talking about a document that was first created in 1875. So as things change, we have to change the Constitution. We talk about that process. And these, again, the purpose of this YouTube is not for me to tell you what the chapter is, but as you're reading, it's supposed to be a supplemental tool, because as you're reading, these are the things I'm highlighting. These are the things I'd like for you to pay attention to. And these are the things you're going to see again. Okay, so the Texas Constitution, it immediately established term limits of the president, which is now called our governor. And it also included the separation of church and state. We also see some things called like community property and common law that were established in the original Constitution in 1875. Now, one of the things that happened, in 1845, one of the things that happened that we still have is that it restricted our legislature to meet every 2 years. So the legislature in Texas, which is the House of Representatives and the Senators, and they meet to establish and create all of our laws. But in 1845, the very first Constitution, it was established that they were supposed to meet once every 2 years, and that still happens. So they meet in every odd year. In January 2021, our Texas legislature will meet. Also in our Constitution, there was a state debt, and we had to limit how much that debt is. Now, the next Constitution after 1845 was in 1861. This Constitution established Texas as a Confederate state. So this was our second Constitution. It was very similar as 1845, but this time it made an enhancement and it recognized our state as a Confederate state. Then we had the Constitution of 1866, where it abolished slavery, renounced all of our war debts. So the Constitution of 1866, our third Constitution, extremely important. It abolished slavery and renounced our war debt. Then we had a Constitution of 1869. And in this one, it centralized the state power in our governor's hands. It also lengthened the governor's term to 4 years. And it also gave the governor appointment powers, which is one of the most important powers that the state governor has. Your textbook will highlight the time that E.J. Davis was governor of our state. It also talks about the Reconstruction era and the corruption that was going on during his administration. Make sure that you read that and you are up to par as to what was going on during and around the E.J. Davis administration. Now, let's talk about the Texas Constitution of today. We talked about what it started as. Now let's talk about what it looks like in modern times. It is the second largest among the states. We have over 87,000 words, and it's 9 times longer than the U.S. Constitution. It contains our Bill of Rights, which is similar to the U.S. Constitution, and it has our broadened basic rights. So it's very similar as far as the outlay. It has the Bill of Rights, just like the U.S. Constitution. And in our Bill of Rights, the Texas Constitution, in the Bill of Rights in the Texas Constitution, it prohibits discrimination based on sex. It guarantees our rights, forbids imprisonment because of debt, forbids committing the mentally ill for an extended period without a jury trial, prohibits suspension without reading your rights. All of those are within the basic Bill of Rights that are outlined in the Texas Constitution. You have a chart in your textbook that talks about your basic right. It talks about it goes all the way from religious liberty down to your fair trial by jury, and then it tells you where in the Texas Constitution all of these rights are. Become familiar with, for instance, the right to grand jury indictment or felonies. That is the 4th and 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution versus Article 1, Section 10 in the Texas Constitution. So make sure that you are familiar with each one, all right? And because this is a Texas government class, we are more focused on the Texas Constitution. If I do throw out a comparison to the U.S. Constitution, I will be very clear in my questioning. Separation of powers. We have 3 branches of government. As I mentioned before, the executive, which is Governor Abbott, judicial, which is our courts and judges, and our legislative, which, as we discussed, they meet every other year. So we have 3 separate branches, and they all have a checks and balances against the other. So make sure you understand. We have 3 different branches, and each branch can check the other. Case in point, the governor has veto power. So, for instance, if a bill is passed on, and the governor has to sign all our bills and approve them, correct? So a bill has worked through its way through the legislative system, and it gets to Governor Abbott's desk. And if for some reason the governor feels that this bill is not reflective or something that is going to benefit the citizens and voters of Texas, he has the right to veto that bill. That is Governor Abbott's check against the legislature. What the legislature have as an example of their check is they have the right to impeach. Remember when President Trump first came into office, and you heard many Democrats said that they wanted to impeach him. Well, the same way there's a process at the national level to impeach the president, we have a process at the state level to impeach a governor of Texas. And so that is the legislature's check on Governor Abbott. Impeachment and conviction. And again, confirmation of appointments. The governor has a very strong right when he gets to approve recommend someone for an appointment. For instance, the governor can elect or can recommend people to the Board of Regents at our university. The University of Houston has a governing board called the Board of Regents. Well, all of those regents are appointed by Governor Abbott. I'm an example of an appointee through Governor Abbott. He has appointed me to his university research board. And so that's a power that the governor has, selecting individuals to boards, but the approval has to go through the Senate. So that's, again, another check and balance. Even though the powerful tool of appointments is very important, there's still a check on these appointments that says the Senate has to approve these appointments. So another example of our system of checks and balances on each branch. Our legislative branch, let's talk about that for a minute. It's a 31-member Senate, 150 members of the House. Now, the Senate has a more prestigious reputation than the House, and the House of Representatives has a reputation of being closer to the voters. There's a chart in your textbook that talks about how old you need to be to run for each office, how long you have to be as a resident in the state of Texas, etc. Be familiar with that chart because you will be seeing that question coming again. As I mentioned before, we have a biennial session. That means we meet every other year, every odd year. We're about to meet, the legislative body is about to meet in January. The regular session is limited to 140 days. It is encouraged highly to pass any bills, and we're going to go through the levels and the steps for bills later on in the semester. But it's important to understand and to go through the process within those 140 days. If, for some reason, that the representatives and or senators cannot go through the process of passing the bills that they need to pass in 140 days, then there's a 30-day special session that is called for them to come back. Now, according to the Constitution, the only person who can call a special session is the governor. Our governor is Governor Greg Abbott. He is a very popular governor. He has risen politically in our state. He started as a judge. Then he was our attorney general. Before that, he was on the Supreme Court. And now he's our governor. He is the head of our executive branch. We lack a formal cabinet in Texas. But the Governor Abbott's powers include removing people from office or removing people from appointments. For instance, I am appointed at his pleasure. And so he granted the appointment. He can also remove me at his pleasure. Budgetary, he sets the tone and the tenor of the session, even though he does not run the session, the lieutenant governor does, and we'll get into that later. But he still sets the tone and the tenor, and also he has budgetary power, and he also has veto power. He can do something called a line item veto, which takes out a portion of a bill. He can do something such as reducing a certain bill. In our judicial branch, we have what we call a fragmented court system. In other words, we have two courts of final appeals, one on civil matters, which is called the Supreme Court, and one on criminal matters, which is called the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Those are the two highest courts. We're going to go into the judicial system. We have a whole separate chapter dedicated to the judicial system because it's very lengthy, it's very complicated. But for the purposes of this chapter, the final word on civil matters comes from the Supreme Court in the state of Texas, and on criminal matters comes from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. We elect our judges in the state of Texas. Many people may say that it's based on partisan. You will see, and I'll send you some links to some articles this week probably. There have been many reports that, especially in our current county, many people have been very negative. I don't like using that word, but negative towards some of our judges for having leniency or for setting bail for certain people who have been convicted and should not be set on bail, and they're saying it's because of their partisan affiliation. So for those reasons, many people have said that judicial races should not be partisan. And this is something that you've seen and heard from many people for a very long time. But in Texas, our judges are elected and will continue to be elected for quite some time. Okay, so going on with the Texas Constitution, you will have local governments. When we say local governments, we're talking about governments that are subordinate to the state, such as cities and counties. The city of Houston is an example of a local government. Harris County, the county that a lot of you live in, the county that U of HD resides in, sits in, is an example of a local government, Harris County. Local governments derive all of their authority and power from the state. Now, amendments. A lot of people will say, well, we've amended the Constitution so many times, maybe we should start from scratch. Because remember, at the beginning, we saw this Constitution. We're still working on a body of work that was provided to us in the 1800s, okay? We do have an amendment process. It is a two-step constitutional amendment process in the state of Texas. First, you have a proposal, then you have a ratification. In the proposal, 2/3 of the total number of representatives, House of Representatives, and senators have to be behind the proposal. In the ratification, it's a majority of that population. They have to vote on the amendment, okay? So for proposal, it's 2/3, but for ratification, it's just a majority. In recent amendments, we have had 152 proposed amendments since 1995 alone. Most of these amendments have been approved, but that's a lot. Many of you, when you go to the ballots and you're saying, okay, I'm going to go vote for a certain person, many of you are surprised. There are many other things on the ballot, such as constitutional amendments that you have to vote for as well. So, there have been criticisms about our Constitution. It's long, it's cumbersome. We have been making too many amendments to a document that was created in the 1800s. It's poorly organized, it's confusing, it's restrictive. Voters show little interest. Those are all the negatives that you've seen and heard about the Constitution. You have seen many attempts to revise the Constitution, but it's failed. Those measures have failed. Many attempts to shorten the Constitution, those attempts have failed as well. So even though you have seen a lot of people criticize our process and the Constitution, Measures to change it have not been successful to date. So those are the points I wanted to highlight as you're reading your third chapter. Again, as a reminder, your first exam is coming up a week from today. I will give you an extensive review, and we will continue to forge on and move ahead. As usual, any questions that you have, please direct them to Jackie@BallyProjects.com. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a good day.